This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hi guys, it's Claire, welcome back. Today I thought I would do the mid-year check-in tag or the mid-year freak-out tag. There are always a couple of different versions of this that go around every year, and I haven't done a mid-year check-in since 2018, mostly because my 2019 reading year sucked, and although 2020 isn't quite up to par with 2018 in terms of quality or quantity of books read, things are looking much better than they were this time last year. I feel like I've had a really good couple of reading months, and for the first time in a long time, I have a long list of books lined up that I'm eager to get to. So I thought it would be worth taking stock of what I've read so far this year, so let's get into the questions. The first question is, what is the best book you've read so far this year? And by best, I take that to mean best book objectively or as objectively as possible. And I was looking through my Goodreads being like, what is the best book I've read so far this year? And then I was like, oh, duh, it's A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry, which is her landmark 1959 play about a Black family living on the south side of Chicago and trying to improve their circumstances and move to a suburban neighborhood. And I had seen the 1961 film adaptation starring Sidney Poitier, and so I went into this play thinking that I knew or remembered what happened in the story, and I really didn't. What I was struck most by was just how vital this play is in so many different ways. With every single character, Lorraine Hansberry just has this command of all the various different rooms of the human soul, and she inhabits them with such confidence and such perceptiveness. It's really just enough to like knock you over. So that's the best book I've read so far this year, but I also wanted to mention my favorite book of the year so far, which is somewhat surprisingly another play, and that is Savage Conversations by Leanne Howe, which is comprised of a series of fraught midnight conversations between Mary Todd Lincoln and the ghost or spirit of one of the 38 Dakota men who were executed in Mankato, Minnesota in 1862 at the order of Abraham Lincoln. And I really admired this book when I read it a few months ago, but every time I've thought back on it since, I've just been like, wow, what an excellent, amazing book. And lastly, I wanted to briefly say that my favorite reading experience of the year so far was definitely The Odyssey by Homer as translated by Emily Wilson. And I honestly can't say that I am an Odyssey stan generally speaking, but I loved Wilson's translation and loved everything about this edition of the Odyssey. The intro, the translator's note, the end notes, it was just a blast to read and rediscover this year. The next question is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to? And as usual, I can't say that I track new releases particularly closely, but my library holds for A Burning by Megha Majumdar and How to Pronounce Knife by Souvankham Thammavongsa did recently come in at roughly the same time, so ideally I'll get to both of those sometime in the next 11 to 14 days. Next up, what is your most anticipated release of the second half of the year? And I guess that would have to be The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante. What else would it be? But two other new releases that I'm looking forward to are Earthlings by Sayaka Murata, because I loved Convenience Store Woman, and Memorial by Bryan Washington. I am reading his short story collection Lot right now, and I'm really taken with it, so I'm excited to read this second book of his as well, and both of those come out in October. Next up is Biggest Disappointment of the Year so far, and I was initially going to say Topics of Conversation by Miranda Popkey, but then I realized that for something to qualify as a disappointment, you had to initially have been excited for it, and I really only read this one because my library hold came in really fast and it was being reviewed everywhere. So I guess my only real disappointment with Topics of Conversation is with the critical establishment for thinking this book was worth writing about. But my actual biggest disappointment of the year was a book that I read recently, and that is One to Watch by Kate Stayman-London, which is a contemporary romance novel centered around a plus-size woman who is starring on a Bachelor-esque show. And because I am a reality dating show enthusiast, I really thought this book had the potential to be up there with Red, White, and Royal Blue as one of my favorite contemporary romances. And unfortunately, I loved about 80% of this book, and the 20% that I didn't like was the central romance, which was a real bummer and a problem that I am going to vent my spleen about in a future video. Next up is the biggest surprise of the year so far, and I would have to say I was really surprised by how much I really enjoyed Open Book by Jessica Simpson. I feel like before that book, I didn't even think about Jessica Simpson. She meant nothing to me, and now I feel like she's my friend and I'm rooting for her, which was a pleasant surprise. And the other biggest surprise of the year, of the unpleasant variety, was just how smutty RODHAM by Curtis Sittenfeld was. Speaking of surprises and bad segues, this video is once again kindly sponsored by the lovely people over at Skillshare. And you know guys, I'm just gonna roll with it as long as they want to. Skillshare is a great online learning platform offering thousands of classes for people who are looking to explore their passions and expand their skills. Those skills could include anything as concrete as video editing, starting a podcast, watercoloring, how to master InDesign or Excel. But Skillshare also has a ton of classes aimed at a broader set of skills and knowledge, things like branding or storytelling or how to build your business. And not to get too meta about it, and maybe I'm thinking about this because I just did my taxes, but I started taking on a very small number of freelance projects and opportunities just in the last year or so. And it's not like I have any grand freelance plans. I'm extremely happy with my 9-to-5 job, but recently I was thinking about how I should maybe start taking myself and my side skills just a little bit more seriously. And so I fell down this Skillshare hole of classes related to freelancing, which I found really useful and fascinating, especially their classes that talk about pricing your work and bookkeeping, which are two aspects of freelancing that feel like fairly uncharted territory to me. And even if you're not trying to actively monetize your hobby or side project, Skillshare still has a lot of classes about ways to kind of explore and expand your creativity in a meaningful way. Skillshare classes include a combination of video lessons and hands-on projects. Most Skillshare classes are under 60 minutes and designed to fit your busy schedule, and premium membership starts at less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. So if you're interested in checking out what Skillshare has to offer, the first 1,000 people who click on the link below will get 2 free months of premium membership. Getting back into the tag, the next question is favorite new author this year. And I don't think I've read multiple books by any one author this year, and so I don't know that I have a favorite new to me author of 2020. However, in the midst of all the conversations that have been happening online around Black Lives Matter recently, I saw a Twitter thread talking about Henry Dumas, who wrote poetry and fiction in the 1960s and who Toni Morrison called an absolute genius. And he was killed by police in 1968 in New York City at the age of 33. And it seems like a lot of his work is currently out of print, but I did find a temporary free download of his short story collection Echo Tree, which Coffee House Press had made available for some window of time. It looks like they're reissuing a print edition in spring of 2021, which is great. But I downloaded that, and I also got a copy of Visible Man, which is a biography of Henry Dumas by Jeffrey B. Leake. So yeah, Henry Dumas is a writer that I'm eager to explore more of in 2020. The next question is newest fictional crush, and I know that this question is mostly addressed to people who read YA, but I find it amusing, so I like doing it. And to be completely honest, looking through my Goodreads right now, I don't have a lot of great options for this question. I don't even think it's applicable in a lot of these books. Like, who out of these books am I gonna pick? Am I gonna pick Bill Clinton from RODHAM? Absolutely not. John Mayer from Open Book? Heavens no. Odysseus from the Odyssey? No. Odysseus from the Song of Achilles? Maybe. And so due to lack of good options, I'm deeply disappointed to admit that my newest fictional crush is Julian from Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, even though he is clearly an emotionally stunted ass, and even though you are obviously supposed to be rooting for the other love interest in that book, which, for the record, I was. However, placing myself in the shoes of the 21, 22-year-old narrator, and if you imagine Julian as someone who you would be physically attracted to, then yeah, I 100% get it. I get why that character is like irrationally hung up on Julian, even though he's ultimately bad news and probably like a shell of a human being. Next up is favorite new character, and I don't think I've gotten mega attached to any characters in particular this year. I guess the most indelible character I've read so far this year would probably be SULA from SULA by Toni Morrison. But besides that, I would also say that I have been really taken with the young 20-something female narrators of Luster by Raven Leilani, Exciting Times by Nisha Dolan, and The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata, which I am currently reading. They're all just extremely complicated and compelling and endearing and just well written in their own ways. The voices in all three of those books are incredibly strong. So those are probably my new favorite characters / narrators. Next up is a book that made you cry. And I don't cry often when I read books, but there is a scene in Lincoln in the Bardo, and it happens only about 60 pages in, so hopefully this doesn't qualify as a spoiler, but it's when Lincoln goes to the tomb of his son Willie the night after his burial so he can hold the body of his son one last time, and it was just like devastating. I don't know if I've ever cried that hard while reading a book. It just like wrecked me. And it actually really reminded me of the second to last chapter of Human Acts by Han Kang, which is another just absolutely gutting depiction of parental grief. Next up is a book that made you happy, and paradoxically I would have to say Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, which is an incredibly weird book at times and a sad book at times, but it's also deeply, profoundly humane, and is also just ultimately kind of a balm to read, especially when I was reading it earlier this year in March and April. It was just kind of exactly what I needed, and was a real comfort. But another book that made me happy in a less complicated way was Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby, who is hilarious. Next up is the most beautiful book you've bought so far this year, and that would have to be Cy Twombly's 50 Days at Ilium, which is a permanent installation at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and this book was published a few years ago. It features pictures from the exhibit, as well as photos from the Italian studio where Cy Twombly completed this work, and it also has some essays from various curators as well, a couple of which were actually worth reading. So yeah, no regrets on this impulse purchase. And lastly, what books do you want to finish before the end of the year? And I definitely want to finish reading The Iliad by Homer as translated by Robert Fagles, and The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by David Truer, which I feel like I am perpetually 50% of the way through. I also want to read Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison before the end of the year. And after years of dabbling in romance, I want to make a more concerted effort to read romance and potentially find my new favorite romance novel. So I will be making a video about that later on. So I'm excited for you all to join me on that journey. Those are some of my highlights and lowlights from 2020 so far. Let me know how your reading year has been going, especially your favorite books of the year so far. Like I said at the top, I have been feeling more excited and inspired by what I've been reading in the past few months than I have been in a really long time. And I have about 5 or 6 different ideas right now for themed reading or paired review videos. So if I can muster the self-motivation, I'm hoping to get those done in the next few months. But either way, I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling excited. 2020 reading has been fairly good so far. I hope that you all have been having a good reading year so far. I hope you've all been staying safe and well and wearing masks, and I will see you again soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.